You'd think, after 15 years, I would have realized it earlier. It was a beautiful May afternoon and the sun shone warmly on our skin, warm enough for a group of friends and I to spark a conversation about sunscreen. We laughed as they compared who had the better tan, and wanting to be funny, I flung my hand into the circle inside with the feet. Nah, you guys beat me. The entire circle burst into laughter, but as their laughter settled, my smile faded. What began as a quick, mindless glance at their hands triggered a harrowing realization. As I scanned each hand of homogeneous shades of white, mine stuck out like a sore thumb every time. And at last, it finally dawned on me, making my heart sink into the pit of my stomach. I was not white. Now I know what you all must be thinking. Hasn't she ever heard of a mirror? Rest assured, I'm not out of my mind, and yes, I've heard of this mirror. I'm not blind. I've been aware of my skin color since as early as the days of kindergarten art class, where my friends would color their self-portraits with that peach-colored crayon, and I was left to color mine some hideous concoction of orange and brown. That being said, I never really saw our differences as much more than a visual one. I was seeing who I looked like, not seeing who I was. But buried beneath the surface was a whole identity of whose significance I hadn't discovered until that May afternoon. But why? Why was my identity buried too deep to find? Why was I so blindsided? And why did it take me 15 years to realize I wasn't white? That I can answer in a single word: whiteness. It's not just the quality of being a white person, rather, in this context, it's a focal point, an axis which our world revolves around. I like to think of it as a pair of glasses. Many of us wear them to fix our vision or to protect us from the sun, but we can all agree that glasses change the way we see the world. In many cases, it's for the better. If I hadn't been wearing mine, I probably would have ended up in New Jersey by now. But in other ways, glasses and whiteness can change our vision to see the world in a distorted view. Black, white, Latino, our entire existence is shaped by whiteness in ways we don't even realize. It's a system that after centuries of existence can make a girl oblivious to her own identity. But before we understand why this idea of whiteness is so impactful, we must first dive into the history of race. Our story begins circa 450 BC. Athens, Greece, is the center of artistic and philosophical growth, and in the center of the city, Athens' brightest minds spend their days pondering the world around them. But as they dream, the working class of the city serve as the foundation. Farmers, tailors, masons, and slaves. Countless slaves. Many of them were a plethora of cultures and ethnicities: Greek, Persian, Ethiopian, and none of them enslaved because of their race. Yes, the Greeks wrongly enslaved the economically and socially subordinate, but at least they weren't racist, right? All jokes aside, it's pretty ironic how a slave system can give us insight about fairness. You see, before and during the time of the ancient Greeks, racial superiority and inferiority was virtually non-existent. That's because, back then, people were identified by culture, not lumped together based on skin color, even if they were destined to work for others. This all changed at the hands of one man, Gomes Yanez de Zerara, Portuguese chronicler and inventor of racism. I know, sounds ludicrous, right? But Gomes wrote a book that did just that. In 1441, the prince sponsored a voyage to West Africa for Portuguese slave traders to capture slaves rather than purchasing them. And because of this, Gomes was in a very patriotic mood. To promote Portuguese superiority, he made Africa inferior. Making no reference to specific culture, he writes, "They lived like beasts. They had no understanding of good, but only knew how to live in bestial sloth." Rather, he groups them under the easiest thing he can: skin color. Once his book was published, it wasn't long until the rest of Europe jumped on the bandwagon, and by the 1500s, British slave traders were using the word beastly to describe Africans too. By distinguishing them this way, we see the creation of blackness, and by default, the other half, whiteness. What the distinction of skin color led to was the association of this horrible fate with a darker skin color. And the basic logic behind it was white people are better than people of color because their lives are better than ours. And its idea didn't just end there. In fact, this notion can be seen in the casta system, the Jim Crow laws, the KKK, the Holocaust, eugenics, and surprisingly in the conversation of two fifth-grade girls. When I was in 5th grade, we had to write an essay about what we wanted to be when we grew up. I struggled to pick something when a friend turned to me and put a hand on my shoulder. Good, I thought, finally someone helped to help me decide. But instead what I heard was a very sincere, don't worry, if you can't choose, you could always become a landscaper or a housekeeper. Even then, I knew it was wrong. But my friend was completely unaware of this. All she had known from people like me were jobs like these. She had been trained to see through this white lens. As a white person, she could be whatever she wanted. She was never forced into the confines of a stereotype. Gomez's idea had followed her through generations to make her associate that lifestyle with my skin color. I want you to think of somebody else. Think of a scientist, a Harvard graduate, a police officer, and a doctor. I bet they all look something like this. White. The underlying associations we make based on race don't only apply to jobs, but affect the way we see ourselves. Since the 1400s, traits that are typically considered good to have are associated with being white. Success, intelligence, discipline, and kindness, to name a few. And because people of color are constantly negatively stereotyped, we view the default of good traits as being white. Gomez's creation of this white lens that causes us to see the world in this way have followed me through my lifetime. For as long as I can remember, I had been a straight-A student, complimented on my eloquence and success. So naturally, when I didn't fit the Latino stereotypes of criminal, lazy, or uneducated, you can imagine I sorted myself into the only category I thought I fit in: white. My epiphany just came to me on that May afternoon. I wasn't seeing the world as it was. I had put on the wrong pair of glasses, and I was awoken that day to the stark reality that we as a society had been brainwashed. And I realized that day how much of my culture I must have lost in the process. And since Gomez, people of color must have lost too. Think of your name. Is it a derivative of your native language? Does it have a special meaning to your family or your heritage? Names are a key aspect of every culture. They're how we honor our ancestors and continue our traditions through ourselves. But if two men, let's call them Jorge and George, were to apply for a job, there'd be two very different outcomes. In one 2016 Harvard study, 1,600 black students applied for entry-level jobs. 25, some of them whitened their resumes by erasing racial clues, such as their names out, while others kept their identities true. In the end, 25% of those with the whitened resumes were hired, while only 11.5% of the original resumes were. This is because we have learned to associate names like Jorge and George with races. And when one is constantly labeled lazy and the other one as hardworking as a result of our indoctrination, which one would you choose? I want to know fashion as a piece of culture. Was that wiped out because of whiteness too? I had the wonderful opportunity to visit China in March, and while I was there, I saw this, a plastic surgery ad. But the model depicted doesn't look Chinese at all. She's white, blonde-haired, and blue-eyed. So when I asked my Chinese host sister if this is what people really wanted to look like, she replied yes. People here, she said, want to look Western. We see lighter skin, lighter eyes, and smaller noses as beautiful. This is because people in Asia have also been trained to see through the white lens. In every makeup product on the shelf, there's skin bleach. And 60% of all millennials in Korea have undergone plastic surgery. And the reason being, because of this white lens. My brother's in middle school, that cesspool of pubescent teenagers with insecurities galore. Their hair, their shoes, their face, you name it, they'll freak out about it. My brother's very into his fashion because of it. He wears a lot of Nike, and before it was considered cool, it was considered ghetto. Though not traditionally Puerto Rican, it was a huge part of the Latino hood culture that I grew up in. He came home one day in a panic, begging my mom for Vineyard Vines. Vineyard Vines, if you haven't seen the memes, is a brand of preppy clothing with a website whiter than Frosty the Snowman. So there he is, standing in his doorway in his hoodie and his sweats, and I think, Vineyard Vines, that's not him. So I ask, Other than wanting something your friends have, why do you need it? He turns to me and with the greatest yearning in his expression says, because I want to look like them. I want to be like them. I looked at him with some scorn at the system of whiteness that I suspected was at fault and said, you don't need that white boy brand. You don't even need to look like them. You're not white. That's okay. Be yourself. It was a brief quip, but my response must have resonated with him because he never asked again. I never really thought about this moment until I started writing this talk, and I think my response must have resonated with me too. Yes, we here are all born into a world where we feel the aftershock of years looking through the white lens. And I won't deny that some of the social norms that we've gained from it are necessary to our survival and success. But remember that peach-colored crayon from the beginning of my talk? It used to be called flesh, which is funny because there are so many ways to represent it. But when Crayola called the white-colored crayon flesh, they were making it the default, much like we do with positive traits. We must realize that this is a dangerous aspect of cultural erasure before we make any change. And once we all do this, we can begin breaking down the barriers that confine us to these stereotypes, just like Crayola did when they renamed the crayon. This isn't a goal that only people of color should strive to reach, but rather for all races and ethnicities to join. So, wear that natural hair at your board meeting. Buy your child that black Barbie. Hire the Jorges and the Letitias of the world. Throw away that skin bleach and wear that melanin like a badge. Because the only way to erase the divide drawn all those years ago by Gomez is to love and accept yourself and everybody else for the spectacular quilt of cultures in which we are all sewn. Thank you.